Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Enrollment for fall semester at AHE is underway. There have been lots of recent changes in our offerings. Professional programs now start at $16,000. Early enrollment discounts are available until May 15th. Get your application in and chat with the admissions team. Your journey starts now.
Yo! Good morning, good evening, good welcome.
Yes.
Good welcome.
Good.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Good welcome.
That was a little gurgle. I made a little sound.
You did make...
That's because I'm having a cup of tea.
Yeah. I mean, it's been quite a morning, and I think we need to describe the venue because we are in, surrounded by children's books.
We're in a guest room because there's just been a lot of activity. We had construction this week because our pantry this is the beauty of living in a house that's almost 200 years old. Our house was built just after Hahnemann's death.
Yes.
Give you an idea. During Herring's lifetime and Libby's lifetime. And with some suspect carpentry, it appears, because in the kitchen there was a pantry, a floor-to-ceiling pantry, where the shelves just collapsed one day. And then it happened on the other side about 3 months later. And so it had to be taken out and rebuilt. And so that was happening.
That's been fun.
It's been fun. So we're not doing a video podcast today because we are sitting...
It would be good, but we can't because we've got Panos. We've got big portraits of Panos and Green.
Yes.
So that would be, you know...
It actually would be a good spot to do.
Homeopathy royalty.
But we would be doing it from the bed like John and Yoko style.
It would be... honeymooning down by the Seine.
Oh my goodness. And there's no extra tea because there was a stink bug in one of the cups
It's
of
like
tea.
one of the Bladder Orientalis story.
Yes, tell the story.
Oh my God.
What a way
I
to
feel
start.
better.
Your humid asthma.
So this morning, in amongst some kerfuffle, it's a good word that, isn't it?
Kerfuffle is a really good word.
That's a Tim word, I think. Kerfuffle. So I made tea, and there's always a bit of extra, you know.
Which I like.
Yeah, me too.
Heat it up. Keep it in the pot. Keep it
in the pot. And so this morning I went to pour my tea, and I looked in my tea, having poured in my delicate amount of milk, and there was a stink bug doing backstroke in the tea.
It's stink
now
bug
the tea
season.
I had looked at, and so to just assuage Denise's anxiety,
that I'm going to drink.
I know that it didn't come out of the teapot. It definitely came out of the cup. It was in the cup.
Or it could have just gone and landed.
But it reminded me of the story, of course, of Bladder Orientalis. Now, back in 2004, I was part of a reproving of Bladder Orientalis because...
Bladder Orientalis being a cockroach.
Indian cockroach.
Indian cockroach.
Yeah, and and the major reason for doing a proving of Indian cockroach is because of the somewhat suspect methodology behind the proving, the original proving, which involved a story. Now, depending on who tells the story, depends on who the players are. But I'm going to go with the Maharaja.
Oh, I heard a prince.
A prince. Well, a prince and a Maharaja are pretty
kind
close.
Kind of the same, yeah.
So, and in what part or state of India, I can't tell you. But the story goes that the Maharaja calls for his daily tea, and the tea...
From the bed.
From the bed. Oh, no. I've got that he was being pakawalad by... You know, he's being fanned.
Oh, in my rendition of the story, he's sitting in the bed getting his tea delivered for his...
I don't think he'd be in the bed.
No?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
No. I think he's up and he's, been in command of his kingdom. But it's time for tea.
Yeah.
And so he calls for his tea, and immediately he drinks the tea. His lifelong asthma symptoms...
Humid asthma.
We'll come to that. Are improved remarkably within seconds. and he looks with bewilderment
And
at
takes
his
a deep breath.
at his servant, butler, tea maker, and they look in the tea, and there is a cockroach swimming backstroke, and that's the story. That's actually the one of the myths that is. It's in. I tracked it back. It goes to about 1910, and I think it's DEY. Published a book on 10 cases of humid asthma cured with Blatta orientalis, whatever potency. And it goes back to that story. And I was somewhat suspect of that. And so, yeah. Do you want to know the rest?
Yeah, of course.
So we did the proving. And in the proving, while there are some respiratory symptoms, but the major symptoms are a feeling of constriction in the lungs and fatigue. Big fatigue. Pain and constriction in the lungs and the chest, and other symptoms as well.
So it sounds like Stanum. What if it would be a
don't know about
differential?
the cough, but yeah.
But the weakness in the lungs. We wound up using that a lot during COVID.
Yeah. So there you go. Proving methodology somewhat improved, although, that proving back in 2004, could have been 2005, can't remember. There are two pieces missing for me to be really proud of that proving. One is that we mainly used students that are involved in a research course, and we didn't get ethics approval because back in the day, it's only, 20 years ago, there was no culture really in around seeking ethics approval for human research. And so
now it's just it's just baked in.
Well, no, it's not.
Well,
it is not broadly, not across
broadly,
homeopathy,
right.
but I think in the kind of with the folks that we're speaking with, it's mandatory.
Yeah,
it's absolutely mandatory.
Yeah.
The need to have some sort of ethical clearance, I think, really just started to crystallize in my mind maybe around, say, 2008, 9, 10. When I got the job running the department at Endeavour, the homeopathy department, I inherited a whole lot of stuff and then realized, that's my responsibility. And so on my plate landed the ethics application for the proving that year. Now, Endeavour, as an aspiring university, had an ethics board that was new. And so I, probably spent a bit of time, but not a lot of time, putting together that application, submitted it, and got a very, very swift rejection back in my email within a couple of days. Like, that obviously met. And then, suddenly I'm faced with a bunch of students that are coming through the program that are about to hit a course that's starting, and the critical part of the course is, you're doing a proving. So I had to very quickly get up to speed.
Was that part of the ethics rejection? Is that you had, because that's perceived coercion, right? To have students participate in a proving.
It was, yes, but it also was, show us how you are not coercing your students. It's...
Let's talk about that for a second. So one of the things, actually, I had to do a course in ethics, in human subject research ethics, in my studies at Johns Hopkins, and I learned so much. I actually didn't think that I would get as much out of it, but the history of the rationale behind having clear ethics in medical research it's really obvious once you reflect on it.
Well, it's critical because of the outrages that have taken place,
Exactly. It's just really something. One of the projects that I worked on was I just had to write a research proposal. This wasn't something to execute, but I did it on Down syndrome.
Oh, that's right.
Remember that? And it was about it was about ethics, and it was about, back in up until C. Everett Koop was the Surgeon General of the United States. People with Down syndrome, there was mandatory institutionalization. And I remember, I grew up with my mom's brother who had Down syndrome, lived with him my whole life. And he, they sort of hid him so that he wouldn't be institutionalized. He was born in 1945, 44. And so they hid him, right? Anyway, so I was really shocked to learn that because of now I can't remember the pathology, but there was some sort of reflux that is really common in babies who are born with Down syndrome. I can't remember all the details around it, but what would happen is, a high percentage of these babies would die. So they would just leave them in the, after they were born to see if they would die. Some of them would die of starvation. It was a horrible, horrible story. So, there was, there are the ethics around that. And then I sort of, used the idea of Down syndrome as an arc to look at ethics over time. One of the things being when you have folks with developmental disabilities who are functional, highly functional, what are the conversations about sex and reproduction, and because it touches on so many ethical, pain points. People have been sterilized against their will, right? But and obviously every argument is going to be individual, but it was a really interesting. I found it fascinating to just sort of swim in that pool for a little while, thinking about, contemplating some of the ethics things. And so when it was after doing that course that I became so much more interested in all of the ways in which contemporary provings, like if you are a student, I remember, actually, you know what, I'm telling a lie, because I remember another program that I worked at, you and I talked about this because they were doing a proving with our students, or they had offered, one of the faculty members wanted to do a proving, and she presented it to the students, and they were going to take part in a proving in the springtime, and I put the kibosh on it because I said, having been through a couple of doozies myself, the last thing you need are students being underperforming at a critical time, or unable to perform to their max at a critical time in the school year.
I've seen it so many times.
So many times, right?
Yeah.
Students
go AWOL, students stop handing in their assignments because they're, in the middle of a process. They're in the middle of some dynamic, especially if they're susceptible to whatever substance it was.
So I guess we need to go back and talk about provings just a little. So if you are new-ish in the homeo parts, a proving is a clinical trial. And the key aspect of it is that it is done on a healthy person. And of course, it always brings up the question, what does health mean? We'll talk about that in a sec. But a proving is a clinical trial that homeopaths basically do on themselves, or on people who are associated or affiliated with the homeopathy community. You take a remedy, you produce symptoms, and then those symptoms are documented because, of course, the principle of homeopathy is, like cures like.
Well, but it's somewhat more complex than that, because
Totally.
Hahnemann says super clearly, first, when you do provings, you get healthier.
Yeah.
So do provings. And the second thing is, you want to learn materia medica? Then take remedies. So permission is given for informal, personal experiments on oneself very early on in the piece. The challenge is that, then, an N equals 1 proving is just an experience.
Right.
But when there's 5 or 10 or 25 folks that are then doing some sort of proving more formally,
Right.
then there are other considerations, and the consideration we're talking about at the very outset is that person that's participating consenting,
Right.
and giving permission to essentially make themselves a little bit unhealthy for a period of time. And of course, classrooms are full of passionate and really interested students. And what a great opportunity to teach homeopathy from all sorts of different perspectives. And so, that dynamic of having enthusiastic young, but student homeopaths who then participate in a study. It's an amazing educational experience.
Totally.
Yeah. But I as I often say these days, I back myself to convert everybody to, yep, let's do this. This is going to be fun and exciting, and yeah, I'll sign up. And that, especially from a different perspective, the perspective you're talking about, that is a person in an unequal power relationship
Exactly.
being coerced into participating in a study that involves a human being.
Right. So that's part of the ethics is the ethics arrangement is that there can be no coercion or perceived coercion, or there can be no power dynamic. There should be no power dynamic. So if you are a student and you're in an institution and everybody's like, yeah, let's do this proving, it'll be amazing, then you kind of feel like, well, I should, or I need to, or whatever. Even if
Yeah, she's doing it, I better do it.
exactly.
Yeah. Or
And
he says that it's a good idea. Geez, okay, no worries.
I mean, and there's so many different pieces about it, like being healthy, doing it on a healthy person. The levels of health that people have now are a little bit different. And
Well, the other part, if we're just focusing on consent and being informed,
yeah,
then those experiences that I've seen over the years whereby the kids in the back of the car did not consent to participating in approving, when mum, who did consent,
Right,
is driving recklessly.
Exactly.
Or the husband who is sensitive is developing the same symptoms but has got to function at work. It's just, there's so many things when people are at the center of their families and communities that, there are a lot of considerations.
and you never know what is
Well, you
going to
never
come
know.
out in
You
approving.
never know. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I wound up in the emergency room during approving.
Well, yeah.
The part about Hahnemann saying we get healthier with approving is so interesting, and there's a lot to unpack there. But one of the things that I think is really key, when people say, oh, you just take a remedy, and if you don't need it, nothing happens. Hahnemann says, no, that which does not cure proves. You might not notice the symptoms, but it is...
Well, there's a starting point is different, because I think, and it came up recently in a class that I was teaching this week. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But the example was that essentially your point was raised. The difference is, what's the starting point? Because if you are an unhealthy person
Right.
that takes a remedy and takes too much of it, generally the situation that I've seen, I'd be interested in your perspective, is that provings on unhealthy people take place when they take too much of an imperfect or kind of,
Right.
dissimilar remedy and have poor communication with their practitioner.
Yeah.
Those three things are usually involved when I've seen proving symptoms.
And so just to be clear for listeners, so the difference between a proving symptom and an aggravation is that an aggravation is an increase, an exacerbation of a symptom the client already has. A proving symptom is a symptom of the remedy that the client has not experienced before. And, one of the things that Hahnemann worked toward through his evolution of homeopathy was the minimization of aggravation.
Yeah.
And that was a really big deal. Aphorism 2, right? Rapid and gentle, meaning, try not to disrupt the person along their road to health. And so as he went through the different editions of the organon, the fourth edition being give a dose and wait, that's the pellet under the tongue. And you do that, and then you don't repeat until you're clear that the action of the remedy has finished. Then in the fifth edition of the organon, no, put it in water, because with something that's chronic, multiple doses will be required, and you need to change up the dose, not repeat it, in order to not aggravate the organism. Okay, so fifth edition, you take a centesimal potency, like that 1 to 100 ratio, like a 30C or a 200C, and you put it in some amount of water, and then you succuss before each dose to further potentize and change the energy pattern, right? Mm-hmm. And then he gets to the sixth and final edition of the Organon, which was published 71 or 72 years after his death, depending on if you're talking about the German or the English translation. Sorry, 78. 72?
Whatever the math is. It was 1920.
1920 in Germany, 1921
Don't matter.
Anyway, okay.
Two old people doing math.
I know, right? Anyway, and in that edition of the Organon is when he introduced the what is now referred to as the LM or Q potency, neither of which were terms that Hahnemann used, which is why I was on such a wild goose chase to find out, finding out the original translation. What did he call it? He didn't even, he called it the 50 millesimal potency. Anyway, so that debate is just semantics of the 20th century. But in that,
Okay.
the purpose was to be able to repeat a remedy, minimizing aggravations, and ostensibly negating proving symptoms.
Yeah.
You may
Now,
proceed.
how you got there was because what we were talking about is the circumstance where a sick person takes too much of something
Yeah.
and does a proving. The other situation, very, very different, is when a healthy person takes a remedy, a substance, and experiences a proving symptom. Those are two very, very different points, and I think most people, I would say a lot of people don't appreciate the fundamentally different starting places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Anywho, so back to ethics. The part that I struggled with was the coercion part. I was already on to that because once, I think it must have been even earlier than that, I remember a student saying, I'm not going to participate in this because it's unethical. And that was, again, somewhat difficult to comprehend because of my enthusiasm about the experiment.
This is the thing, and the enthusiasm also of the community,
Yeah.
because it's the shamanic experience
Yeah.
of homeopathy. And so I can imagine that there are people who are listening and going, yeah, but that was the best part. But that's the reason I want,
Like Herring says, it's the high feast in the church.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. The second was the makeup of an ethics body is who are these people? Were they your neighbor or the priest or the vicar
This
or
was
the lawyer?
surprising to me
Yeah.
that an ethics committee is not a group of practitioners of whatever.
No, it's like a
seeking
jury.
Ethics.
It's
Exactly.
a bunch of folks.
Yeah.
And so the bunch of folks that usually does have a lawyer involved. There's usually a skilled person, in that regard. The question was, well, how can you guarantee the safety? And that goes to the heart of ethics, because to do an experiment or to do a clinical trial on something which is untested involves a degree of risk.
Yeah.
And what are the benefits of the experiment, and do the benefits of doing the experiment outweigh the possible harm? And so that's what the ethics committee is always weighing up. And if it's a poorly written ethics application which just says, well, this is what we do in homeopathy, so shut up and just give me my tick in the box, they are legitimately going to say, well, actually, no.
Right.
No. And that was a real surprise to me. And so I had to very hurriedly get up to speed. I eventually got it over the line, but I only got it over the line that first year by repeating an experiment that had been done.
That's right.
The previous year.
Wasn't that you did chamomilla or something?
Chamomilla. Yeah. So there's two decent provings of chamomilla that are in the ether somewhere.
This so many things have come up around this. It's funny because this as is always the case is tangential to what we were going to talk about, but it totally fits. And I love that the stink bug was just happened, right? So it's going to take me a second to remember what I was going to say. But do you know about cockroaches in chocolate, in cheap chocolate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, simply isn't that just that there's been no manufacturing process developed that can guarantee that there is no percentage of cockroach
in chocolate
because of because
they're cockroaches.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. But so I remember being in homeopathy school and Eric Summerman saying something about kids. Like I learned bladda as a remedy that can be helpful for kids who have big asthma attacks after Halloween, after eating a bunch of cheap chocolate.
Oh, really
it's
nasty
a little bit
chocolate.
isopathic, but in a pinch.
It's not bad advice.
So going back to ethics and provings, I'm going to venture to say that there have been no ethics boards involved in any of the provings that I've participated in.
No.
But I will say that in the ones that were of more dangerous substances or the potential for it, we gave verbal approval. We had the option. So when I did proving in 2007, there was a 1 in 3 chance that it would be a radioactive.
So that's kind of Jeremy hedging his bets.
But it was still, like, I really appreciated that because, because then you get to say, not gonna.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a form of blinding, but 1 in 3 is still not. Anyway, it's totally legit, and that's what's gone on a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but at least because that was the first time I had ever participated in proving where I knew anything at all about it. I had only done blinded provings. Now, fast forward, I was involved in the radon proving as a supervisor 2-3 years ago, whatever that was, and we all knew what it was because it was a highly toxic substance.
Yeah.
Right? And so there was consent given. Now, it takes away the blinding process, but I was really glad to know. You, of course, weren't glad that I agreed to do it when you had said no more provings.
Well, totally, because I think actually because you got messed up big time, which messed me up.
Right.
No,
fair enough.
And I'm not talking about where's my dinner at 6 o'clock on the table, but I'm talking about the fact that,
Can we go woo-woo for a minute on this?
Oh, okay. Yeah, whatever.
Well, because homeopathy is energy medicine, and we're in the field, and just like you're talking about you're talking about sort of the concrete effects of a person who's participating in proving, and the net effect on the people around them, and the responsibility we have for others around us. But there's also the thing that's I think that amazed me as a new homeopathy student participating in provings, right? Because it was just part of the culture that I was raised in. That supervisors got symptoms. People adjacent to the proving got symptoms, sometimes symptoms that were strong. So there's this way in which, like, there's the energetic exchange, and at the launch of a proving, sometimes even before people take the remedy, they're experiencing almost a prelude to what is to come. And I know for some people that's like, okay, turning this off, this is too weird for me, man. But at the end of the day, right, that is real. And so my excuse for participating in the proving was I was asked to be a supervisor. And so what I said to you, my logic was, well, I'm already in the field, so I got to do it. Because I would have potentially experienced symptoms, and then I would have had FOMO because I wouldn't have had any idea if it had to do with me.
Right.
That makes sense, right?
No,
not at all.
Makes no sense whatsoever. That's funny. What you've just said is part of the debate, part of the big debate around, provings and what are we actually doing in those experiments. There's so much good literature that have really teased apart so many of these points. The thing is about if we're going back to, you see, there's no ethics involved in any homeopathic provings up until, I'm going to say, perhaps the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
So full stop.
Yeah.
So
But that would have been just in alignment with the development of ethics protocols across the board.
Well, correct. But it means that every remedy that is in the HPUS list has been grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of assumptions, but probably decent assumptions around that particular point. But that doesn't mean just because, something wasn't happening before and, we've got different perspectives now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't use it.
Right.
Now, the other thing is the stumbling block for folks that have been doing provings and, their perceptions of, my provings are fine and I think they're really good. The first is ethics and the second is insurance.
Right.
And so often, almost universally in homeopathy, there's been no, backup.
Yeah.
For any participants when things go wrong. And things have gone wrong every now and again. People who've experienced all sorts of dramas.
Well, I think it's terrifying, some of the substances, like when you did box jellyfish. That's one of the most dangerous substances on the planet, isn't it?
Well, if it's alive, yeah.
Well, yeah. Okay, but I mean, what if somebody had a heart attack?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because box jellyfish. Just give a little overview of what the poison does.
Well, the substance is a decent sized jellyfish in the shape of a box, right? It's kind of a floating box, and from each corner, you've got hanging these filaments that can drift and hang and drift in water for not only feet but yards and meters or whatever, if you're imperial or whatever measurement tool you're using, and then they are peppered down these filaments. I believe they're called namocysts.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, which when if they touch a fish
I can't even
or a human being, create an immediate response, and it's a pain response. Not only is there extraordinary in those people that have survived a box jellyfish experience, not only are there whip-like
like lesions
that emerge on the skin where the touch happened, but the pain response is indescribable, and people have been described as they're dying, they're still screaming. And those
don't
folks,
say the other symptom. This is a family show.
No, that's fine. But
you can look it up and find also what happens when they die. But that's a really, and people have heart attacks.
They do. Their blood. There's a whole lot of. There's a cascade of bodily functions that go horribly wrong really quickly.
Right.
And usually it's said that you've got about 20 minutes before you're gone. The heart eventually. Your blood pressure goes up and up and up and up and boom.
Yeah.
But your heart is involved. The nervous system is involved.
My gosh.
Anyway, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Anyway, but the reason, I think it's really important because there. That you'd be stepping into something that has a known toxicity to it, a known, right?
But why is that different to, let's say we know about a lovely Lilium tigrinum, for example.
That's the point that I was going to say. But was because
it's a lovely lily.
The proving that sent me to the emergency room was a substance that would be completely perceived as benign and innocuous. So that... and it wasn't just me. 3 people wound up with the same symptoms. In fact, Jeremy and I were in the emergency room the same day.
At the same time.
Same time.
So
Not in different parts of the country. Different parts of the world. He was in Israel. I was in Philadelphia.
So
anyway, but where this came up is
going.
because this week one of the classes that I taught was about contemporary methodologies in homeopathy and the decisions that we have to make as practitioners regarding whether or not there's a remedy that we feel comfortable using based on our knowledge of the substance, its procurement, the chain of custody if it's a biological substance, but also the proving methodology, right? And we looked at both systems and provings. Sort of, this is part of the suite of critical thinking development that allows us to make better decisions in the clinic. And I love teaching it because every year or twice a year when I get to teach it, it makes me think about different clinical choices that I've made and the times when you bend the rules, right? So the model that when I first started to teach this, it was because I taught in a program where everything was on the table. It didn't matter. A meditation proving was equal to, a more Hahnemannian than Hahnemann proving that is worthy of a monograph for submission to the HVUS. You know what I mean? And it was the same. It would have been exactly the same. And so I developed this continuum where we started with that holier than Hahnemann, proving. And then we went across the continuum to more and more subjective criteria being introduced to the process. So we looked at, dream provings, meditation provings, on down to trituration provings. And, and the students who are tracking with ethics, tracking with following Hahnemann's guidelines for the substance, who are thinking about aphorism 20, right? You can't just understand a substance through mere intellectual fathoming. I'm paraphrasing, but it's only through the experiential, through the experience that you know what's going to happen, right? That's the what I call redemptive suffering. It's humans who are suffering in service to another, right? Making them self-sick. Anyway, so once you get into some of these systems, provings are bypassed altogether. There aren't any. Or they're provings that are really brief. A dream proving is where people put a vial of the remedy under their pillow. They go to sleep, they have a dream, they tell about it, and that remedy makes it into the materia medica. Now, when we say makes it into the materia medica, one of the things that new students often think of is that the materia medica is like the Torah. It's like it's there and somebody must have blessed it and it's fact, when in reality people just publish stuff. And with the accessibility and availability of online information, or in some of the software packages, it's all treated as if equal, right? So one example that I give is about Jan Schulten and the introduction of mineral remedies for which there had not been provings, in the spirit of Dmitry Mendeleev, right? He's the guy, the chemist, who perceived the periodic table long before all of the elements were known to exist. So through predictive patterning, he created a table. He saw it in a vision. All the pieces fell into place, and he perceived, based on what he knew, what else could be. Yeah. And so that was pretty cool. Well, Jan Schulten, and I want you to tell about when you went to the seminar when he released his book, right?
Oh, so he, you're right. I was at his, I think, I don't know if it was his first lecture, but it was his first international lecture.
When he's releasing this sort of system.
Yeah, and he pulled up to the conference with a carload of warm books, and the green one, minerals.
Yeah,
and it was pretty interesting because it was my first conference, and so I was pretty excited about what was going on, and so he said, firstly, I don't trust provings. The motivation for all of this work and for this lecture is that the provings have been poorly done. Now, in and of itself, he's not wrong,
right?
But he's also not right.
Yeah.
With that, and then he said, so therefore, I have been thinking about different ways of making my clinical decisions based upon, well, firstly, combined minerals, and then secondly, based on where I perceive the client is in their process, based upon the map of nature, which is the natural classification of nature.
Which at that point he was only using the periodic table. He then expanded it to plants and things. But.
Yeah, and so he said, and when he said the words "therefore," well, I'm paraphrasing, but I remember what happened because he said, "I am making my decisions based upon my understanding of," and as soon as he didn't say provings, the first person got up and walked out.
Mm-hmm. And then what year was this? 1992?
92.
Yeah.
I think it was like 92. And then the second person, and then the third, and then that whole row went, nah, and then left. And quite a public display of that ain't homeopathy.
Right.
Like, who are you? This is not homeopathy. And so half the audience left and half stayed. And it was kind of fraught. It was interesting. It was fraught. I don't know if that's the word, but it was a thing.
See, I find that story to be so compelling in terms of there's this way in which we can be super rigid and say there's only one way to do it, more Hahnemannian than Hahnemann. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is I could do whatever I want and I can just make it up. And then there's somewhere in the middle, which is where we develop our critical thinking, because, when I teach that lecture, it's 2 parts. It's, so it's 3 hours of material around these are all these great thinkers who have gone into something else, who may or may not regret where they've gone, and who get themselves into a little bit sometimes of trouble because you've created a system, you've got a following, and people want you to continue on, even if you might be having some doubts about the system that you've created, right? Anyway, so it's really interesting, but at the end of the day, when I start introducing the idea of the periodic table and Dmitri Mendeleev and the predictive patterning and all of that, also go through, a little bit of sacred geometry and a little bit of the Fibonacci sequence, which I had wrong in my I have a typo in my PowerPoint in the math, and I have to fix it. Just saying it again. I did. Anyway, but the Fibonacci sequence, which is basically the patterning of life forms. Everything from the way the way that rose petals open to the pattern of a pine cone to the circumference of an egg, right, is all based on this particular sequencing. And so in a way you go, oh, this is all, homeopathy is based on the laws of the universe. And so sometimes looking into those laws of the universe, like you can say, well, that's probably what Schulten was working from, is this is a pattern that works because, Mendeleev in the 1800s was able to, now he built his system based on the atomic weight, not the atomic number, but it doesn't really matter, right? There's a pattern to it. And I think that there's a way in which homeopaths have tried to use that knowledge to further homeopathy, which I think is cool, except if it goes too far. And it's like, how do you know when to say, I'm going to choose a remedy for a sick person that maybe has a suspect proving?
Yes.
Right? You have to make that based on a critical decision. So, for example, if we keep going with the Schulten example, because I don't think I would have left the seminar. I think I would have wanted to listen, especially back then, right? But there's always a nugget of truth in something, right? But here's a challenge. If we continue on with the Schulten thing, so what he did was, he says, okay, if there are provings, I've got the provings. If there isn't a proving for an element that's next door to another element, I'm going to extrapolate what I know from the neighborhood the element sits in, and I'm going to come up with materia medica. And then he went one step further, which is to combine them and to say, okay, we've got,
Kent did the same thing.
Exactly. And Kent got in big trouble.
Well, because he made shit up.
He did. And he had a retraction. He made a retraction, but those remedies are still out there. It was like one of the ammoniums, I think.
Yeah, calc silicata. It's in all of the combined minerals in lesser writings.
Yep.
I think he got called out at a conference. H.C. Allen.
Yep.
Big grey beard guy.
I came across when I was doing my research and reading through all the journals, I came across that, that call out. And basically what he said was, you can't assume that because you know what calcarea does and you know what silica does, that if you put them together, you're going to have some, combination of the two. Right? And so that's basically what Schulten did. So he came up with themes. So sulfur has to do with the father, and the muriates have to do with the mother. And then
that's a really interesting example, because my first ever experience of thinking along these lines was in this case of a really interesting. What was he? He might have been a German guy, and he had this is 1,000 years ago, and he had think respiratory chronic respiratory
I
troubles.
thought you were going to say short pants.
No. and the lederhosen.
The reason I say that is because Al made himself a pair of cutoffs.
Oh, my
and when he wears
God.
them, he looks like
I look
a
like
German tourist
Yeah,
from the
yeah.
70s. It's really fun.
I use them in the garden when I've got some hard work to do.
Yeah, and I can't.
Anyway,
look
that's
at you.
irrelevant.
Anyway,
So getting back to my point.
Yeah.
Anyway, I gave him Natrium muriaticum. All right. And he did okay. And then I've reevaluated the case and I went, nah, that didn't really hit the mark and I'm going to give him sulfur. And then...
you thought, well, why don't I give him nature himself?
And that's actually the third, it might have been the fourth consultation. And he did brilliantly on Natrium Sulf. Now, there's a bunch of... that, but my logic at my early... because it was early days of homeopathy for me, but my logic was maybe there's some logic behind Schulten's thinking about mixing your minerals.
Well, and there are going to be times when it's going to work. When I teach the calcareous salts, I teach a case of a little girl who's now probably retiring, but she the first remedy that I gave her was, I think, calc mur. Based on Schulten logic, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimately she got calc phos, and that was a remedy. She only ever needed, calcareous salts. But when I teach it, it's to basically say, yeah, this was a clinical decision that I made a million years ago based on the knowledge that I had. It was still in the do no harm. It didn't, and it was good, but it was a close enough outcome. It wasn't really the best remedy, but still, it was good, right? What are you laughing at?
Just you.
Oh. So anyway, but come forward though back to what we were talking about with Jan Schulten, and one of the challenges is that so that book Elements was published in 1992, yeah. Since then, or somewhere around then. Since then, how many of those remedies have been proven? Well, lots of them, but that book in its entirety sits on people's shelves. It is in search engines of repertory software, and you might remember a fit that I had, and I kind of feel bad because the student had just had a baby, but she submitted a case for clinic, and the remedy I think we prescribed was germanium, for which there is a good and robust proving that Jeremy Scher had done, and she used, her reference was from Schulten. And I just taught row 4 of the periodic table to that group not that long before. And I felt kind of bad because I had a cow sent it back. Oh, no, you did not, But think about that, right? If you're not being exposed to critical thinking about the contemporary editions, not just the contemporary, the old ones, right? We've talked a lot about Burnett and all those folks, or post-Kentian homeopathy. I mean, if you don't have context, everything is fair game and the same. I taught the bird remedies a couple of weeks ago, and there are a couple of good provings. Peregrine falcon, Haliaeethus leucocephalus, the sparrow. What is it?
Sparrow.
Sparrow, but I can't remember the.
Don't matter.
Anyway, and then there are a bunch of C3 and C4 trituration provings. And one of them, there are two that get me so I get all worked up. And the students, by the time they're learning those families of remedies, they've been around for a while and they know what gets me worked up. And I'm teaching it. And you get to scarlet macaw, which is a trituration proving, right? And you'll never guess what a key symptom in that remedy is.
Big nose?
Wearing bright colors.
Right.
Come on. And then there's an owl proving, also trituration proving. So a trituration proving, for those who are
Owl's
wondering.
milk. That's a joke.
It's when a remedy is made, the first step is trituration. So you take the material, you put it, it's in a mortar and pestle, and then there's a very exacting time. Al and I go back and forth 6 and 4, 7 and 3 minutes with the grinding and scraping.
Hahnemann's it's super flexible between 7 and 3 and 6 and 4.
I know. It's like every day or every other day with an LM, right? So anyway, so there are provings that have been done by simply, I when I'm feeling snarky, call it a contact high, where people are grinding and scraping and breathing, and then that experience becomes materia medica. Well, that's really different than taking a remedy with each individual person having their case taken to understand where their susceptibilities lie, what is their baseline, and then following that over, months. One of the classes that I teach on the intro to the animal kingdom is to look at everything from the blood, milk, and nosodes like Lysinum, the rabies nosode, right? So, but I start by doing a comparison between Jayesh Shah's proving of Ratus ratus in India during an epidemic of plague, right, transmitted by rats in what's it called, Surat? Yeah, and so it was blood from a rat in India, and then there was a proving done by Nancy Herrick of a white rat called Cody in a clean cage who had a sniffle, like they knew everything about him. And those provings were presented in completely different ways, right? But Jayesh's Ratus ratus proving, these provers were getting symptoms for months, Mm-hmm. And so people were following those cases. Well, that can be really helpful because some things are slow simmering expressions of pathology. So if you do a dream proving or a trituration proving, you may get an idea that of an ovarian issue. But how do you know what the modalities are? How do you know what the actual experience is of the symptom? So in going through and teaching those bird remedies, for example, there were 3 that I taught that have a good proving. And then there are a bunch of them that are just done in a trituration proving. Well, how do you make the call?
Well, the call is, back to Hahnemann, it is a valuable thing to do provings for one's own health, and it's a valuable thing to learn materia medica if you're doing those self-experiments. The line is, for me, that I don't want to see any of that stuff in my textbooks. I would prefer not to ever have to create some elaborate filter where I'm trying to filter out information that's come from, those provings with more speculative methods.
But I think you have to ask the question. So, for example, I brought up
just one other thought, because I'm with you in the sense that I don't want to practice with 126 remedies, right?
Right.
I want to practice with 126 well-proven remedies we can rely on because they've stood the test of time, and then other other remedies that have been proved really well.
Yeah.
And far, I can't seem to find the filter that does all of that, because a whole lot of the less solid, robust information gets through.
And it's really interesting because, how far do you go on what is considered a good proving? So, for example, one of the examples that I teach is Peter Tomanello and the GEM remedies, where he does the immersion provings. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Hahnemann had said in the beginning, he says, for a soluble substance, a succussion is like a trituration. It's the same. Then he goes back and he goes, actually, I lied. Even a soluble substance needs to be triturated because of the importance of the trituration process. Good. So let's say, though, that you are looking at a case and you've already learned some of the well-proven GEM remedies. Maybe it's Otimus, Jade, whatever. And then you're like, oh, it's not those. Maybe I go to one of those other lesser proved remedies. But that comes from experience. Yeah. And I think that's what, that thing that we teach in our final semester about critical thinking is to sort of preemptively help students deal with that influx of information so you can make that choice. When do I step outside and use a remedy for which there isn't a robust proving? Or where do you feel comfortable relying on clinical data over time?
See, for me, I'm kind of pretty super happy with the way that Peter deals with it, because he calls up people like myself and says, I've done a Pearl immersion proving, and now I want to add in information from a more robust, not more robust, but a more Hahnemannian method.
Yeah.
And in that way, I think the information seems a bit more...
Totally.
Solid.
Anybody who's asks that question, and of course, I'm quite fond of Peter, and he proved molybdenum, which helped me out at a point.
Oh, yeah.
And you were a prover in that. I want to go back as we're wrapping up and
I
just
forgot.
say...
I was too.
Yeah. I want to just say that you've mentioned several times provings help our health. And I want to add a few caveats to that, because I think I've met some people who are like, yeah, I just took a dose of da-da-da, and I'm going to do this. I'm doing a self-proving. I mean, I think that, proceed with caution in that, especially for people who have,
I'm not talking about a remedy a day, no.
No, but there are some cowboys out there. But it kind of goes along with, I think my hesitation comes from just what we've been seeing from people who have been overusing homeopathic remedies.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And it's a little bit different than it was in Hahnemann's day. So we take that with advice. Is that what you say?
Under advisement?
Under advisement. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that feedback. I'll take it. Under advisement.
I'll take that under advisement. I think we're wrapping it up. So a quick announcement is that there's a very good chance we might be adding a second podcast a week. Let's see how it goes. I'm saying out loud to manifest it. It looks like we record these on a Friday most of the time. We're thinking we might record a short midweek, a Wednesday podcast. And we're kind of working out the details, but it might be more sort of based on not insider conversations about homeopathy as much as an exploration of integrative medicine and the experiences, because homeopaths are often engaging with providers of all stripes in supporting clients, and so just conversations about that. So we'd love your feedback if you think that's a good idea. And
we'll take it under advisement.
And we'll take it under advisement and put a cockroach in it.
Folks, it's been spiritual. We will see you next time.
Yeah.
And take care.
Yeah. Have a good one. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Home Foundation is hard at work. The Practitioner-Generated Research Network is like nothing the homeopathy community has seen before. Through the PGRN, we will be able to bring groundbreaking research to the world that will help protect homeopathy for generations to come. Learn more about how you can contribute to research at homefoundation.org. That's home, HOHM, foundation.org.